Here in the UK, there's plenty for young people to be frustrated about. The housing crisis means that young people have to live at home with their parents for longer, wait longer to start their own family, and struggle to save money, as they're handing more of their paycheck to their landlords via rent. Getting a job is harder, with fewer starting positions available, partly thanks to the rise of AI, while university is getting more expensive. On top of all this, politicians don't really seem to take younger voters that seriously. Despite Labour's promise to build 1.5 million new homes by 2029, current evidence suggests they're not going to come anywhere near this target. And despite Starmer's promise to abolish tuition fees when he ran for the Labour leadership in 2019, in October he announced the first increase in tuition fees since 2017. So, in this video, we thought we'd take a deeper look into the problems facing young people and explain exactly why younger generations are losing out in modern-day Britain. Who is the most influential person in the world? Well, last year the TLDR audience ranked Donald Trump as number 1, with these people all landing in the top 10. But do you agree? Click the link in the description to cast your vote for our 2026 ranking. Now, there seem to be 4 key areas where younger generations are losing out: housing, employment, education, and politics. We're going to look at these one by one and explain why the political system has exacerbated these issues. Now, maybe the most acute issue facing young people at the moment is housing. We've made lots of videos discussing this before. In fact, we just released a longer video, like this one, on why the UK has a housing crisis a couple of weeks ago, which is linked below. The TLDR is that housing has gotten significantly more expensive in the last few decades, largely as a result of a planning system that doesn't do enough to encourage building. Digging down into the data, we see that wages have roughly doubled since 1990, while house prices have roughly quadrupled. More specifically, if we have a look at the average wage to average house price ratio over the last 75 years, it generally stood at between 4 and 6, meaning the average house generally cost between 4 and 6 times the average wage. In 2024 though, the average house in the UK costs 7.7 times the average salary, rising to 11 in London. This means that fewer people can afford to make it onto the housing ladder, and those who do it later in life. While home ownership rates have declined among all working age groups, this drop is most pronounced amongst the younger age bracket. Back in 1994, just under 60% of those aged 25 to 34 owned their own homes, but by 2022, this had fallen to around 40%. For under 25s, the home ownership rate dropped from 24% in the early 2000s to just 10% in 2023. All of this has meant that the average age of house buying in the UK is now 34, an all-time high. As such, many younger people choose to rent instead. But even this is inordinately expensive, with the ONS showing that, since 2016, average private rents have consistently remained above 30% of the median income, what they consider affordable. So, with few affordable options available to them, younger people are increasingly opting to stay at home with their parents. Around a third of those aged between 25 and 27 lived with their parents in 2023, up from 20% in the early 2000s. This is all pretty depressing for younger people. For those that rent, it means that they're throwing more of their paycheck to a landlord, and for those that live at home, it delays them from starting a family of their own, likely contributing to the UK's fertility crisis. Considering these weren't issues for the older generations, it's easy to look at this as an example of intergenerational unfairness. And while, in many ways, it is, we also need to look at this through the lens of class as well. While fewer younger people are buying houses, the ones that are increasingly from wealthy families, with the bank of mum and dad supporting their purchases. This didn't used to be the case. In 1975, 6% of first-time buyers relied on parental wealth for their purchase, and only 1% had their parents buy the entire property. But by 2020, 30% of first-time buyers relied on parental wealth, and 5% had their parents buy the property for them. According to data journalist John Byrne-Murdoch, a 35-year-old with parents who don't own their own home, and are therefore not terribly wealthy, needs to earn around £25,000 more annually than someone with home-owning parents to have the same opportunity to buy a house. The point we're making is that, while home ownership is in decline for younger generations, this problem is less acute for those with parental wealth. Now, let's move on to the second area in which younger generations are losing out: employment. Young people are finding it increasingly difficult to actually get a job, with recent data published by the House of Commons Library showing that the youth unemployment rate stood at 15.3%, or around 702,000 people. There's been a steep increase in recent years, with a 0.5 point increase in the last year alone. While this figure doesn't seem that high compared to the youth unemployment rate post-2008 crash, there are signs that things are starting to get worse. For instance, this year, only 27% of final year students, compared to 33% in 2023, had secured a job by February of their graduating year. Perhaps, as some of the media would have us believe, this is simply because Gen Z are lazy and aren't putting enough effort into finding a job. But this doesn't seem to be the case, as if we actually look at the average number of job applications made by graduates and the percentage taking part in recruitment events, we can see that both figures are now up on previous years. So, why are graduates apparently struggling to get jobs? Well, the issue seems to be that there are simply fewer jobs available. ONS data shows that the number of vacancies have been steadily declining since the pandemic, falling to a 10-year low. The FT also found that 47% of the top UK employers reduced their intake last year, and 40% expect to reduce it further this year. As we see it, there are two main factors causing this. The first seems to be the rise of AI, which employers are using to replace entry-level jobs. Research from KCL found that firms whose workforces are highly exposed to AI capabilities reduced total employment by 4.5% on average between 2021 and 2025, with the effect concentrated almost entirely in junior positions, which fell by 5.8%. Making matters worse, the same report also found that workplaces that are highly exposed to AI were 16.3 percentage points less likely to post new vacancies, and separate data from the job search site Adzuna found that the number of job postings for internships and junior jobs with no degree requirements had fallen by 32% since the launch of ChatGPT in 2022. The second factor is recent policy changes disincentivising hiring. In the 2024 budget, Rachel Reeves upped the rate of employers' national insurance, making it more expensive for firms to hire new employees. As a result of the changes, a full-time worker aged 21 or over on minimum wage costs employers an additional £1,600 in tax per year to hire. Now, these problems are already bad enough, but what makes them worse is that, even when younger people do get a job, their economic prospects remain lower than most. Firstly, when younger people do get jobs, they're often not paid that well. The Resolution Foundation found that, while the share of workers on low pay, which is defined as hourly pay that's only 2/3 of the median, fell significantly among other age groups between 2015 and 2024. But low pay is still prevalent among 16 to 24-year-olds. And secondly, there's also evidence that early career unemployment can lower your earnings later in life, something known as unemployment scarring. According to economists at the University of Leicester and the University of Nottingham, each month of unemployment between the ages of 18 and 20 leads to a permanent income loss of 1.2% over the course of a career. So, not only are younger people finding it harder to get a job, which is hurting their pay in the long term, but even when they do get a job, it's often not even that well paid. So, let's move on to the third part of this video: education. An obvious place to start here is by looking at the cost of university. In 1998, the government introduced means-tested tuition fees, whereby, depending on family income, individuals would be expected to pay up to £1,000 per year for their university tuition. In 2004, this was tripled to £3,000, and the means testing was dropped, and in 2012, this was tripled yet again to £9,000 a year. Due to some smaller increases since, tuition fees are currently £9,535 a year. Now, the way that tuition fees and maintenance grants are repaid is essentially via tax, which is only paid after an earnings threshold is reached. Anything earned over that is taxed at 9%, and after 40 years, any remaining debt is wiped. For many graduates, this system essentially means that they're paying 9% of their income over the threshold to the government for the full 40 years, partly because tuition fees are already high to start with, and partly because the interest applied to them is, frankly, ludicrous, with certain student loan plans being charged RPI plus 3%. In 2018, it was estimated that as many as 83% of graduates will never fully pay their student loans off, meaning they will essentially have to pay an additional unofficial university tax until their debt is fully wiped. Because the student loan repayment system is pretty weird, this can lead to some pretty awful situations for workers, in which the effective marginal tax rate actually exceeds 50%. Making matters worse is the fact that the repayment threshold has, at various times, been frozen, most recently between 2021 and 2025. The longer these freezes last, the more financial burden it puts on lower and middle income earners, partly because more income is being spent paying back the loan, and partly because more people are dragged into actually paying. At the 2025 budget, Rachel Reeves announced another threshold freeze from April 2027, lasting 3 years. In response, the OBR predicted that someone earning the minimum wage would earn around £28,995 in 2030, which is a mere £400 below the repayments threshold, meaning even more students will be pushed into repayments earlier. Clearly then, university degrees are getting more expensive overall, increasing the financial pressure on graduates. Now on to our last topic, politics. As you've hopefully gathered by now, there are various ways in which younger people are losing out in the UK, which isn't the case with other generations. Research from 2022 found that around 25% of pensioners are millionaires, and that pensioner poverty has been on a downward trajectory for decades, to the point that pensioners are now half as likely to be living in poverty as children. In fact, in the early 2000s, pensioners had a similar income level to families with children. In 2025, pensioners are around £5,000 richer, and could be around £7,000 richer by the end of the decade, according to the Resolution Foundation. Despite this, government benefits disproportionately benefit older people, with benefits changes increasing pensioner incomes by £900 on average between 2010-11 and 2024-25. Conversely, benefits for non-pensioners have been cut by, on average, £1,400 per year. Take the triple lock, for instance, which guarantees that the state pension rises by whichever is highest out of inflation, average wages, or 2.5% each year. In 2023-24, the state pension cost £124 billion, and according to the OBR, by 2028-29, as a result of the triple lock, it's expected to cost £158 billion, a £34 billion increase. In fact, the government's own forecast predicted that, unamended, the triple lock will account for 7.7% of GDP by 2070, 50% more than it costs now. Simply put, the triple lock is unaffordable, but the government refuses to do anything about it, as it could be politically toxic. Just look at what happened when the government tried to means test the winter fuel payment. They lost huge swathes of support, and protests continued for months, to the point that the Labour government actually U-turned on the decision. Because older voters are more politically engaged, they're therefore more able to push the government into action, with 2024 election turnout among the 66-plus age bracket 20 points higher than the 18 to 25 age bracket. The thing is, this is a self-reinforcing prophecy. Younger people feel that politics lets them down and don't engage with it, making it easier for the government to ignore them. Unless this changes, it's unlikely the government will start taking the concerns of younger people more seriously. Our magazine Too Long is now officially in stock, with this latest issue focusing on the reshaping of the Middle East. In it, we run through each country in the region to discuss how they're rewriting the next chapter of their story. From Qatar's growing global influence, who will govern New Gaza if Iran could dash for a nuke, or how Lebanon can disarm Hezbollah. This is a region we know a lot of you are interested in. So this latest issue dives deep with our real thoughts on the next era of this often troubled region. Not only that, we also have sections focusing on UK, EU and global news, including our full rundown of some of the biggest elections which happened around the world over the last year. There's also our interview with YouTube's Money and Macro on how to fix the EU economy, the rise of the politician influencer, and the new left emerging in the UK. Subscribers to Too Long automatically get 20% off every copy as long as they stay subscribed. But as a special Christmas offer, you can get an additional 30% off your first issue if you use code December25 at checkout. Find out more by heading to toolong.news